On this episode, we visit Silver Spring, Maryland to observe a targeted crosswalk enforcement detail. We talk with one of the decoy pedestrians from the Montgomery County Police. In Charleston, the South Carolina Coastal Conservation League has helped pass legislation relaxing school acreage requirements. Finally, we travel to Brooklyn, New York, where Transportation Alternatives has been advocating for pedestrians and bicyclists. Stay tuned. We're in Silver Spring, Maryland, talking with George Branyan of the Maryland Highway Safety Office. What do you do for the office?
I'm the Pedestrian and Special Programs Coordinator, so I coordinate safety programs for pedestrian safety and bicycle safety, as well as some other programs.
What's going on behind us today?
What you're seeing is an excellent example of the most effective pedestrian safety enforcement technique around, which is called the crosswalk sting, or otherwise known as the targeted crosswalk enforcement detail. What you're seeing here is plainclothes officers using a crosswalk, and if cars fail to stop for them, according to the law in Maryland, then other officers are pulling them over and giving them a ticket.
And how did Maryland get started with this program?
A couple years ago, when I started my work with the Highway Safety Office, I learned that pedestrian enforcement didn't mean just giving jaywalking tickets, and found out by learning about the issue from some very, very leading people in the country, such as Dan Burden, that there were programs and training resources available to give officers the tools and the techniques to actually also enforce pedestrian safety laws on drivers as well. So what I did was bring Dan Burden and John Moffitt, who is the Highway Safety Commissioner for the state of Washington, to Maryland last year, and they did a wonderful training program for about 75 officers from a dozen jurisdictions in the state on how to enforce pedestrian safety laws, both on pedestrians effectively, as well as learning the new techniques for enforcing on drivers.
How much time does it take to do a program like that? How long are the officers tied up from other work?
Well, they're going to be out here, it sounds like, till about 2 o'clock, which is about 3.5 hours of total work. You can do a crosswalk sting in an hour or an hour and a half. It all depends on how long you want to stay out there. Generally, you can get 30 to 40 citations an hour. So it's a very effective way. If officers are looking to get a real big enforcement bang for their buck, the way it's structured means you're going to get citations.
And notice you got a couple TV crews out here. What role does the media play in one of these operations?
Well, this is a very important factor. At the Highway Safety Office, we cannot afford to run PSAs day and night telling people to be careful when they cross the street and to yield and stop for pedestrians. So what we really count on is publicity about this enforcement. The crosswalk sting is extremely attractive kind of event for media. They know what jaywalking enforcement looks like. They generally, even where this has been done before, they're always curious to see this kind of enforcement technique go down. So what we've found is, over the last year and a half, that the cameras, multiple stations continue to come out and give coverage about pedestrian safety. And anytime you've got the media attention, you can say, this is an important issue to everyone in our community, and we want people to stop for pedestrians, look out for pedestrians, and if you're a pedestrian, be careful when you cross the street and use the crosswalk. So it's a very important component. We get a lot of bang for the buck out of that.
How many different jurisdictions in Maryland are taking advantage of this program?
We have several jurisdictions, all the most populated jurisdictions, which would be Baltimore City and Baltimore County, Prince George's County, Montgomery County here, as well as Howard County. Annapolis City in Anne Arundel County is very aggressive with its crosswalk enforcement. They've done nearly 30 crosswalk stings over the last year and a half. They're very aggressive. We also have pedestrian enforcement happening in Ocean City, and all of this is funded through overtime funds from the Highway Safety Office.
And what's your eventual goal? What do you want to see come out of all this in the end?
Well, I'll tell you, a friend of mine just returned from California, and he said he couldn't believe it, but drivers stop for pedestrians in California, and that's very true. Many places in the West Coast, the driving behavior is different. And what I'm looking for is long-term behavior change. If we can get the awareness of pedestrian safety laws heightened, if we can get drivers to comply with the law, I think we can actually have a culture change on the East Coast here in Maryland, and actually make it so that, like today on Halloween, that it's not so scary to cross the street.
We're in Silver Spring, Maryland, talking with Sergeant Tom Harmon with Montgomery County Police. What are you folks doing today?
Well, we've set up a crosswalk enforcement detail, and we're at the intersection of George Avenue and Noyes Drive. We picked a location because of its proximity. Certainly, it's a marked crosswalk. It's an uncontrolled crosswalk as far as a traffic signal, and it's an area that we've had a lot of complaints. As you can see across the intersection, there's a synagogue, and a lot of the folks that worship there walk to the synagogue Friday nights and then again Saturday mornings. And it also is on one of the major arterials leading into the central business district, so we do get a lot of pedestrian traffic heading toward the metro station. It's a street that has a speed limit of 35 miles an hour, but as you see, as you stand here today, just by the rush of cars going by, the speeds are greatly in excess of that 35 at times. So it's kind of a two-pronged attack. We're targeting vehicles that aren't yielding to pedestrians in the crosswalk, and today the pedestrians are actually police officers wearing orange shirts, and we're also doing speed enforcement in either direction, north and southbound in Georgia, for those vehicles that are exceeding the posted 35-mile-an-hour limit.
And how do you set up an operation like this? What's the considerations that go into setting it up?
Well, so far in the county, we've targeted intersections where there are not controls, where there is no cross signal. The major arterials are the roads where we've seen our pedestrian fatalities. We had a fatality on this road about a year and a half ago. We know that the speeds on these arterials, particularly leading into our central business districts, are too high. So we're looking at streets where we've got PEDS crossing. It's a multi-lane road, which makes it even more of a challenge, and we know that the speeds are high here.
Now, what determines when a driver's in violation? And when do you give a ticket?
Well, we've set this up where we have cones placed north and southbound 300 feet from the crosswalk. So that's a football field in length. The officers in the orange shirts are not entering the crosswalk unless those vehicles are on the far side of those cones. So we're giving drivers 300 feet of reaction time to see the pedestrian, and we couldn't be more obvious than wearing bright orange shirts. So we're giving them that much room to see the officers, to react to them, and to hopefully stop for them in the pedestrian crosswalk.
What kind of excuses do you get from the drivers you stop?
Well, often you'll get the excuse that I didn't see the pedestrian, and that's certainly one of the reasons why we're wearing orange. It's certainly the same color that state and county road workers wear when they're working the roads, and they wear it because it's a safe color. Regrettably, too many of those men and women are being hit by vehicles while they're doing their work. Not being seen, folks will often say, well, you stepped out in front of my car. That's not the case. We're in the crosswalk 300 feet before they even get to a point where we're jumping into crosswalks. And we're being very careful that we give them that much time, not only for our safety, so we can react to vehicles that, for whatever reason, are not going to slow down, or if in fact they don't see us, which seems kind of incredible to me. But we're not jumping in front of them. We don't. It would be too much of a liability for the officers.
And you've done a number of these so far. Does the department consider them a success?
To be honest, what makes them a success is the media attention. We could write 100 tickets today, and certainly those 100 people would be affected. I'm hoping in a positive fashion that they're going to understand that they're not bad people, they just need to abide by the law. But I think it's the media attention that really gets the word out. And a year or so ago, when we had a crosswalk detail, and we had a lot of media attention, I had a case where down on Fenton Street, just off of Colesville, we have a crosswalk that is not controlled that runs to City Place Mall. And on that particular morning, there was a woman in the crosswalk, and a young fella stopped his car where he should, and he let her cross the street. And about a half a block after he had passed through the crosswalk, I stopped him, and I had him roll down his window, and I'm sure he was thinking, what did I do? What does this cop want me for? And I said, I wanted to thank you for yielding and stopping for that pedestrian in the crosswalk. And he said to me, he goes, I've seen it so much in the media lately with all these crosswalk stings, and they're talking about the laws. I'm stopping at all crosswalks. So the message does get out. And it's one that not only are we hoping the media gets out, but we're also starting programs in our elementary schools. We feel that we've got to educate kids to the fact that they have a responsibility as pedestrians, that they know the rules of the road and they become safe pedestrians, and each one of those kids someday will drive a car. And that's the unique situation. It's not us against them. We are all pedestrians at certain times, and most of us are vehicle drivers. So we have to realize that we play both roles. And when you assume each individual hat, you do have certain rules that you have to abide by, and you have responsibilities to respect the other person, whether they're a pedestrian or a vehicle operator.
We're in Charleston, South Carolina, talking with Michelle Sinkler, who's Land Use Program Director with the South Carolina Coastal Conservation League. What is the League?
The Conservation League is a nonprofit conservation organization that's dedicated to protecting the natural resources of South Carolina's coast, and as well the traditional communities that populate our coast.
And you looked at school size, school lot size. What sort of research have you done in that over the years?
Well, one of our main programs is our land use program, and so the Conservation League spends an awful lot of its time dedicated to urban planning and rural planning. School sprawl is one of the main issues we attempt to tackle along the coast, and so what we concentrate our efforts on include basically trying to draft and advance policy that discourages the huge mega schools on the outskirts of metropolitan areas. So, for example, one of the things we do is in a community when they're trying to build the new 3,000 student high school, we will try to work proactively with the community to find a solution to that mega school. Rather, we prefer the community schools embedded in the neighborhoods.
Other than the problems with a factory setting for that many students in one spot, what other problems does it create when you have schools that big?
That's a good question. Leaving the education issues aside for a moment, we all know that these large schools tend to basically ignore the needs of the middle student, that is the student who's somewhere in the C range. Rather, the larger schools tend to cater to the highly advanced student or the special needs student. We got involved in school sprawl issues because basically here's what happens. Large schools remotely located are engines of sprawl. Basically what you happen is if a school is located far on the outskirts of an existing town, what follows then, or what is necessary, is the infrastructure to get to that school. You then need the roads, you then need the sewer and water, and the public then invests in all of that infrastructure out to these schools. What then happens is all of the area in between the existing town and the remotely located school begins to fill in with sprawl development, and you basically exacerbate sprawl, and it continues to follow out to the school. You then have, again, typically the pattern of this development is the automobile centered type of development where you have this one highway where all traffic has to get onto to get to the school, and you basically are just extending a pattern of sprawl out to the school.
Now, when you have schools within neighborhoods, what do they accomplish?
It's interesting. Everyone sort of talks about schools, neighborhood schools, as if they're something new. We've all grown up with neighborhood schools. We all remember what it was like to walk to schools, or at least most of us remember. That's a thing of the past these days. Neighborhood schools basically reintroduce the idea that schools are part of the community. And what you're saying is schools should be located where the students are and close to where the students are, so that students can have the opportunity of walking to school, biking to school, and parents can have the opportunity to not be in the car all the time taking their kids to school. In addition to providing a facility that's close in proximity, so that students have an alternative mode of transportation to their school, you're also creating another center for the community. That's a civic center. Right now, the remotely located schools are used from 7 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, and then everyone goes home. They're too far for anyone to use them after hours. If you locate a school within the community, that school site becomes a public site, and others can use it. Others can use the ball fields after hours. Others can use the auditorium after hours, and it basically enlivens the community.
What has South Carolina been doing to address the issue of school size?
Well, to understand what South Carolina has done recently, which is exciting, history is a little bit important here. Like many other states, South Carolina's Department of Education had within its regulations school siting requirements, and those school siting requirements were requiring schools, whether they be elementary, middle, or high schools, to have inordinately large parcels on which to site the schools. As a result, communities and school districts were being forced for new schools to place the schools on large tracts, by and large on the outskirts of town, because the cheaper land, the cheaper undeveloped land at such large acreages are found on the outskirts of town. And again, the reason this is problematic is they're far from the students, these large sites. And so the Conservation League worked with other groups to first investigate why these regulations were in place. And what we found was that indeed, these site regulation requirements were born out of an engineer's room somewhere in Texas. And so that indeed they really didn't have any relation to student performance, to community involvement, and the like. And so thereafter, what happened was sometimes a stroke of luck, and then sometimes certainly coalition building. But as a result of the new election, South Carolina has a new governor, Mark Sanford. And Mark Sanford pulled together what is now known as the Quality of Life Committee. And this Quality of Life Committee basically involved, I would say, 30 people, representative of a whole diverse group of interests, whether they be realtors, conservationists, educators, the business community, you name it. This Quality of Life Committee was composed of these interests. And what rose to the top of issues that affect quality of life was community schools. That is, placing schools so far from town. So basically, this group came up with the recommendation, this Quality of Life Committee came up with the recommendation to eliminate the acreage requirements found in the State Department, the Education Department's regulations. And thereafter, we all worked in concert with the governor's office, with the Department of Education, with other educators, and certainly with conservationists to draft legislation that would eliminate these acreage requirements.
So what was the bill that eventually got passed?
The bill that eventually got passed was not as it begun, but basically the bill is called the Neighborhood Schools Bill. And it started out sort of as a two-prong approach to reintroducing neighborhood schools to our communities. The first, as I stated before, was the elimination of the acreage requirements. The second component of the bill was a cap on school size, and by that I mean school enrollment. And the bill mandated, in most circumstances, that schools be limited in student populations depending on elementary, middle, and high school. So for example, an elementary school would have been capped at 400 students, a middle school would have been capped at 700, and a high school would have been capped at 900. Everyone was in agreement about the acreage elimination, and ultimately that portion of the bill, of the Neighborhood Schools Bill, did pass and was signed into law this summer. So we're very excited about that. The second component of the bill ran into a little bit more trouble, in the sense that there was not consensus of what the cap limitation should be. And there was also issues of cost. In other words, the issue was brought up, will the cap on student enrollment increase cost to the school districts? The Conservation League has done a lot of work in that area as far as research, and we have found through other people's work that indeed economies of scale do not apply in school construction. Rather, the larger the schools, the less they tend to perform, and the more they can cost in the long run to the community when you take into consideration transportation costs, administration costs, and when basically loss of students. So many students are lost in these huge schools that they ended up dropping out, and the dropouts tend to cost the community a lot more in the long run than do the smaller schools. So that said, we're very excited that the acreage elimination was passed into law, and we look forward to working with our coalition next legislative session to work on the school cap issue.
We're in Brooklyn, New York, talking with Aaron Napperstack, who's project coordinator with Transportation Alternatives. What is Transportation Alternatives?
Transportation Alternatives is New York City's pedestrian and cyclist advocacy organization.
What sort of things do you do?
Well, TA does a lot of different things. We, let's see, well, we've been around for about 30 years, and we've really just pushed city government in all kinds of different ways to make the city safer and more accessible for bikes and people who walk. You know, things like bike lanes and access to the bridges. Car-free parks is a big initiative that we work on. Just, you know, constantly like doing little things. We organize a big 100-mile bike ride around the city called the Century Ride. There's a great website, actually, transalt.org, which really has everything. I'm organizing a fun campaign right now to ban audible car alarms in New York City. We're getting a lot of good traction on that one. So there's a lot of different things that TA is doing.
Now what's this plaza behind us?
Well, this is Grand Army Plaza. This is really one of the great, you know, urban spaces in the entire country, I'd say, certainly in New York. It was built just after the Civil War, as New York City was expanding from Manhattan and Brooklyn down on the waterfront. This was all farmland out in here, down to Coney Island, and you know, they built the street grid up to here, and you know, this arch is memorializing the defenders of the Union, you know, 1861 to 1865. So all the streets are named, you know, Lincoln and Union and Garfield, and this whole area is really just sort of, you can really, you know, looking up at that statue, you can really, to me, I feel, you know, the way, sort of the public spirited, feel like the way that the country felt, you know, right after they'd gotten through that big trauma and that big war and sort of came out victorious, at least this side did. So
what's it like for a pedestrian trying to walk around here?
Well, you know, unfortunately, one of the great urban spaces of the country is just completely devastated by traffic, and this is one of the most complex traffic intersections in New York City. In fact, it might be the most, and it's the most dangerous place for pedestrians to walk in all of Brooklyn. It's a real gauntlet. It's you know, this is really, you know, Brooklyn was once its own city, and we have our own cultural institutions. Prospect Park rivals Central Park in every way, and in fact, the people who built same guys built this park as built Central Park. They thought this one was nicer. They thought this was their masterpiece. You know, you've got the Brooklyn Public Library back there, and the Brooklyn Art Museum, and you know, a lot of stuff right around here, and it's really hard to get around, and basically on foot. It's even hard to get around in a car. I mean, there's nothing about Grand Army Plaza that's working, and you know, you've got intersections here that where pedestrians are lured into the middle of Flatbush Avenue, and literally the traffic signal stops you in the middle of Flatbush Avenue, and it's often people pushing strollers and, you know, elderly people who use the public library. You know, it's inevitably kids and moms in the middle of the day, and these folks get trapped in the middle of one of the busiest intersections in New York City with no protection, no medians, no bollards, you know, just nothing to help them out. And you know, through TA, we've talked to DOT, Department of Transportation, about this. They do not care. You know, they believe that they have fixed this place up so that it's good for pedestrians, and they're done with it. And it's a constant fight with these guys, and it's very, you know, I'm sort of young. I mean, there's people who've been working on this stuff for 20 years, so it's kind of still amazing to me that a person, sort of like a city agency person, could walk through here, a person who's responsible for this public space, and not see the problem and not want to fix it, especially when fixes are so simple and inexpensive, like sticking some bollards in a dangerous, pedestrian refuge.
And a lot of this traffic ends up going through Prospect Park. What's that like?
That's one of the craziest things that we have going on here is we've got this absolute gem in the middle of Brooklyn. Brooklyn is the most populous of the 5 boroughs of New York City. It has the least parkland of any of the 5 boroughs. In fact, if Brooklyn were its own city, as it once was, we'd have probably the least parkland per capita of any city in the country almost. Yet we've got cars going straight through the middle of Prospect Park. And we've got these 2 drives that were designed by Olmsted and Vaux, the designers, as carriageways, for slow, sort of bucolic country carriage, horse-drawn carriage rides through the park. And it was very much part of their scheme to make Prospect Park into a place that sort of made you feel separate from the city, put you in a natural setting, because it's what we don't have in New York City. But over the years, the drives have been widened and paved, and they're basically superhighways going through this park. Olmsted and Vaux designed these drives so carefully, they made it so that you can never really see more than 50 or 60 feet in front of you. There's always a turn or a hill, so you feel like, unlike the grid pattern of the rest of the city, in the park, you're winding through this slow country drive. Well, basically what that means now is we've got SUVs, careening 40, 45, 50 miles an hour sometimes through this park, where they can barely see in front of them more than 50 or 60 feet. And, a thin lane of jogger, a thin, they call recreation lane, running alongside them. It's extremely dangerous. We had a woman killed here a couple years ago. It really radicalized the neighborhood. But we were able to get a number of concessions. We were able to get a lot more car-free time in the park. But, not enough. We still got cars driving through our only park.
Visit us on the internet at www.pedestrians.org.